How could this happen to Mom? I had returned to my childhood home after a long time, only to find my mother's skeletal remains in the garden. According to the police investigation, she had been dead for over a month. However, this was hard to believe because I had been in contact with her until just the day before. So who was I exchanging emails with? In the midst of my confusion, I found my mother's diary. When I learned the terrifying truth written in it, I trembled with fear and anger. I had only ever seen my father's face in photographs. "Your father passed away in an accident when you were 1 year old," my mother often told me when I was little. I grew up in a single-parent household, but my mother worked tirelessly to put me through college. She was reserved yet strong and kind, my role model and emotional support. My husband, Pete, knew this and respected her, always treating her kindly. Pete was my college classmate, and we got married when I was 26. We started our life about a 2-hour drive from my childhood home. However, my mother, who had been overworking herself for decades, began to fall ill frequently and often had to take time off work. "Mom, why don't you come live with us? It would put my mind at ease." "My husband says it's fine too." "That's very kind of you, but I prefer living alone." "It's more comfortable for me," she replied with an apologetic look, gently refusing my offer. I could understand her feelings, but as her daughter, I couldn't help but worry. So, at my suggestion, we started communicating almost daily. My mother wasn't tech-savvy and even struggled with emails, so we always talked on the phone. Hearing her voice every day was a comforting moment for me, living apart. Of course, I wanted to see her face sometimes, but due to my busy work schedule, I could only visit her about once a month. To make up for this, my husband would help out when he could. "If you can't make it, I'll go check on her." "Don't worry," he'd say. "Thank you so much. It's a big help. Your mother is important family to me too." Saying this, he would visit her from time to time without complaint. My husband was kind, but he had a bit of a problem with money management that worried me. He would buy things without considering the price or consulting me. We had argued about this many times, but his spending habits didn't improve, so I had to restrict his allowance. However, one day, I was shocked when I saw the credit card statement. "Why is the bill so high? It's over $1,000. "Oh, that's, Pete stammered, hanging his head. "This defeats the purpose of setting an allowance. What did you spend it on?" "Well, the other day when I went out drinking with friends, I ended up treating them." "What? You can't afford to pay for others." I raised my voice in anger without thinking. "I'm really sorry. It won't happen again." My husband seemed to reflect on his actions and swore he would never waste money again, so I decided to forgive him. However, less than a month later, that promise was broken. This time, he had used our joint savings without my knowledge. "I really needed the money," he said. "That's the worst. How could you touch our savings?" "I'm sorry. I'll put it back when I get my next paycheck." My husband apologized, but he didn't seem very remorseful. This really upset me. "That's enough. If this continues, I'll divorce you." When I said this in the heat of the moment, my husband suddenly became flustered. "No, please don't do that. I'll really change from now on and be more responsible." He apologized repeatedly, almost in tears. "There won't be a next time. But I haven't forgiven you yet. It depends on your actions from now on." I decided this would be the last time I'd turn a blind eye, and I declared this to him. I thought he might repeat the same behavior soon, but if he did, I'd leave him without question. After that, Pete started consulting me even for small purchases. Not only that, but he also began to help more with housework and became even more attentive to my mother's well-being, showing a very dedicated attitude. Since then, we had no more money problems and lived peacefully. However, about 4 years into our marriage, something strange happened with my mother. "I've caught a cold and lost my voice, so please communicate by email for a while." I received an email from her. What? How? I was surprised by this sudden change, as she had never been able to use email properly despite my many attempts to teach her. But given the content, I became worried. "Are you all right? Should I come over now? I don't have a fever, and I don't want to risk giving you a cold, so you don't need to come." The replies came faster than I'd expect from my technophobe mother, which made me even more uneasy. Something felt off. I wanted to go to her house right away, but I was in the busiest period at work and couldn't find the time. "Should I go check on her instead?" my husband offered. "Would you? I'm sorry to always rely on you, but that would be a great help." I thanked my husband for his offer and asked him to go. The next day, he visited my mother. When I returned from work, he reported, her throat seemed to be in bad shape, but otherwise she was fine. This put me a little at ease. But I hadn't been there in a while myself, so I decided I'd go see her face as soon as work settled down. Several weeks passed, and as the hot summer was coming to an end, there was a distinct feeling of autumn in the air, especially in the mornings and evenings. I was still only communicating with my mother via email, which made me feel somewhat lonely. My work had finally passed its peak busyness, and I unexpectedly got an afternoon off, so I decided to go visit my mother after a long time. I'll surprise her by showing up without notice, I thought. When I arrived at her house and rang the doorbell, there was no response. There didn't seem to be anyone home, so thinking she might be out, I used my spare key to enter and wait for her return. The house seemed dusty, as if it had been closed up for a long time, so I opened all the windows. Then, as I glanced towards the garden, I noticed that part of her vegetable patch, which was her gardening hobby, had been disturbed. Huh? Why is only that part messy? When I went out to the garden, I saw traces of digging in one specific area. Curious, I decided to dig there myself. To my horror, I uncovered a skeleton. I screamed, collapsing in fear. Shaking uncontrollably, I immediately called the police using my phone. While waiting for the police to arrive, I fearfully looked at the remains again and noticed something familiar buried with them. It was the necklace I had given my mother for Mother's Day. No, why is this here? Although I didn't want to believe it, the worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. Is this Mom. Faced with this unacceptable reality, I felt as if my body was slowly sinking into a deep swamp. 10 minutes later, the police arrived and began investigating the garden. Allison. Are you okay? My husband, whom I had contacted, also arrived, and we were questioned about the situation. We told them that my husband was the last person to see my mother and that I had been exchanging emails with her until the day before. The police seemed puzzled by this information. According to the condition of the bones, she had been dead for over a month. Moreover, they couldn't find my mother's cell phone anywhere. But I was emailing with my mother. She was even considerate of how busy I was with work. Allison, that's enough. It's okay. I was in such shock that I couldn't think straight and could only cry. From that point on, my husband took care of all the preparations for my mother's funeral, while I felt like I was in a dreamlike state. Before I knew it, the funeral was over. Thinking I should organize my mother's belongings, I started visiting her house every day. While cleaning out her dresser, I found a letter-sized box. Oh, how nostalgic! Inside were drawings I had made of my mother when I was little, letters, and presents, all carefully preserved. I was touched that she had treasured these things, and as I picked up the contents of the box to look at other items, I noticed a relatively new notebook at the very bottom. It appeared to be my mother's diary. Wanting to know more about her recent life, I hesitantly turned the pages, only to find something unbelievable written there. What? This can't be true. Learning the horrifying truth, I felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I'll never forgive this. Determined to corner the culprit who had tormented my mother and done this to her, I began preparing my revenge. 2 days later, when both my husband and I had a day off work, he took me out for a walk. "I'm just glad you're in the mood to get some fresh air," he said. Yes, I suppose so. My husband was happy that we were going out together after I had been depressed about my mother for so long. "I'm a bit tired. Shall we have some tea?" We decided to enter a nearby cafe. The interior had a few businessmen and groups of middle-aged women scattered about. My husband chose a window seat, and we sat facing each other. "What would you like to drink?" "I think I'll have a float." His eyes sparkled as he chose from the menu, like a child. "Hey, I have something I want to talk about. Will you listen?" I said to him. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" he asked, meeting my gaze. "Well, you see, I've been wondering about something regarding my mother. How is it possible that I was emailing her the day before she was found, when she had been dead for over a month? Well, maybe the killer was pretending to be her and replying to delay the discovery." He seriously shared his theory. Of course, that was the first thing I had considered too, but there were several things that didn't add up. But isn't it strange that one of the emails mentioned wanting to go back to the spa we all went to before? Only the three of us knew about that spa trip, right? Well, that's true. But couldn't it just be a coincidence, he said. As I muttered, "I wonder," he nodded while sipping his float. However, he seemed somewhat flustered. "Look at this," I said, taking out a document from my bag and placing it in front of him. Mom seems to have been sick. I found this while cleaning out her things. It was a medical diagnosis. I hadn't known about it until I saw it, but my mother had an illness that required treatment. Did you know about this? I asked. No, I didn't, he replied. I see. When I called the hospital to confirm, they said my mother had stopped coming for appointments at some point. It seems she even quit her treatment midway. My husband crossed his arms, appearing to be deep in thought. Maybe she had her reasons, he suggested. Like not being able to afford the treatment costs. I ventured. Ugh, maybe. But there's no point in thinking about that now, is there? He looked troubled and gradually became more restless. I stared at him directly. You borrowed money from my mother, didn't you? Of course not. Why would I? Although he denied it verbally, he was clearly panicking. I want you to be honest. The truth is, you borrowed over $20,000 from my mother, didn't you? As I pressed further, my husband, either angry or defensive, stood up and slammed the table. How dare you suspect me? You're out of your mind to suddenly say such things without any evidence. Maybe you're the one who's a bit tired. My husband's aggressive voice instantly drew the attention of everyone in the cafe. Realizing this, he apologized and sat down, lowering his voice. The other customers quickly looked away, but they seemed interested in our conversation and were stealing glances while trying to eavesdrop. I do have evidence, I said. To his surprise, I placed a notebook in front of him. It was my mother's diary that I had found while cleaning her house. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, confrontationally, as if he was on guard about something. I turned the pages and read aloud what was written there. The diary detailed how Pete had been threatening my mother and extorting money from her, along with the exact amounts. Moreover, you threatened to hurt me and ruin my life if she didn't lend you money? That's despicable. It seemed that when my mother said she couldn't lend any more money because of her treatment costs, my husband had told her, "What's the point of living so long? It's just a waste of money." Furthermore, he had forced her to choose between her own body and her daughter, making her give up on treatment while continuing to ask for money. All of this was written in this notebook. Explain what this means, right now. I don't know anything about that. Besides, a diary like this isn't proof of anything, is it? My husband became defiant, leaning back in his chair with a confident attitude. You're right. This alone might not be decisive evidence. It could be dismissed as my mother's delusion. See? I told you so. As expected, you're a woman who understands, he said, nodding and laughing through his nose as if mocking me. Then how about this? I started a video on my smartphone and showed it to my husband. Pete, who had been smirking with a relaxed expression until now, was at a loss for words. How do you explain this? Don't just sit there silently, answer me. What was displayed was footage from a camera hidden in the living room of my mother's house. On the last page of my mother's diary, it was written, "Pete's demands are escalating, and I'm feeling it's getting dangerous. If I can get video evidence, I'll take it and tell my daughter everything. It seems that my technophobe mother had bought a camera and asked an electronics store to install it for her. The video showed the two of them arguing over money lending, and then in the heat of the argument, my husband losing his temper and raising his hand against her, causing her to fall. After that, he panicked and carried her body towards the garden. When he returned to the living room alone, he took all the money from her wallet and even took her cell phone before fleeing. From that point on, the video only showed an empty living room. The culprit was my husband, Pete. I'm truly shocked that you would do something like this. But there's no way for you to escape now, I said, glaring at him with anger and contempt welling up from the bottom of my heart. However, he didn't flinch and instead started shouting. That damn old hag! Why did she have to leave something like this behind? Why did you extort money from my mother? Huh? Of course, it's because I have debts. It was to repay those. My husband was completely brazen, admitting it without any sign of remorse. Apparently, his irresponsible attitude towards money hadn't improved at all. Unable to stop spending beyond his means, he had accumulated debts. I had to contribute to our household expenses after getting married, but I also had debts to repay. I was troubled too, you know. This was also why he had used our joint savings without permission. You pretended to be responsible in front of me, but behind my back, you were doing such things. Well, I had to act like a decent husband, or you said you'd divorce me. If that happened, I wouldn't be able to squeeze money out of your mother, right? That old hag was surprisingly hoarding money. Being a single mother doesn't mean you're poor, you know. When my husband started going to check on my mother on my behalf, he had secretly looked at her bank book that happened to be lying around. My mother wasn't the type to live luxuriously, so she must have been saving bit by bit from her small salary for emergencies. My husband must have grinned when he saw the amount, thinking, I can use this. At first, she lent me money right away, but from the second time on, she started hesitating, saying something about treatment costs. So you used me as a shield to threaten her. That's so dirty. It's touching, isn't it? Saying her daughter's happiness is more important. Is this what they call a parent's love? He grinned at me, but his face was utterly detestable. My husband might not have any sense of guilt at all. Even so, you didn't have to take her life. Oh, that was just an accident. I didn't intend for that to happen. But when I hit her a bit too hard, she fell and wasn't breathing. I thought it would be trouble if she rotted inside the house, so I went out of my way to bury her in the soil. He spewed out words that made me wonder if he had any human feelings at all. Thinking about my mother's feelings, I couldn't stop my tears from flowing. However, I couldn't give up here. To clear my mother's regrets, I had to reveal the truth and turn him over to the police. So you were the one pretending to be my mother in those emails? Yes. It was my way of consideration, you know. I thought you'd feel like you had more time with your mother. I don't need that kind of consideration. He had thrown away my mother's cell phone after I contacted him about finding her. There was no need to hold back anymore with this man. I'm going to report this to the police now. With all the evidence gathered, your crime will undoubtedly be judged. I wonder how many years you'll get. Hey, you're joking, right? I never intended to kill her in the first place. This was just a sad accident that happened. If that's the case, my mother might have been saved if you had called an ambulance right away. Your crime is grave for not doing that and instead doing what you did. Wait a minute. Please, not the police. We're husband and wife, aren't we? My husband suddenly changed his tune and started pleading with me. Did he really think I would choose not to report him in this situation? We're no longer husband and wife after you tormented my dear mother. We're getting a divorce. I declared our divorce and pushed away my clinging husband. He then slammed the table again and stood up. You bitch, don't mess with me. Pete seemed to have forgotten we were in a cafe and came at me with a loud voice. However, it ended abruptly as he grabbed my clothes. Several people in the cafe restrained him. Stop it. Let go of me. Allison, do something about these people. He cried out, begging me for help. Reflect deeply on what you've done and spend your life making amends. As I said this to him, I could hear police sirens in the distance. It seemed the cafe staff had called the police, and Pete was taken away by them. Our divorce was finalized, and through a lawyer, I claimed $30,000 in damages. My husband was arrested for this incident. His selfish crimes were severe, and he's likely to spend a considerable time in prison. I wonder if I've managed to clear some of my mother's regrets. I thought about this while looking up at the clear sky. From now on, I'm determined to live my life in a way that won't shame my mother in heaven.